Welcome to the Performing Animal Rights podcast, where we explore the intersection of creative practice and the animal rights movement. I'm your host, Ben Hunt, a performance artist and researcher in performance studies and animal rights activism. Each episode, I sit down with activists and creatives who are using the arts to push boundaries and challenge the way we think about animals, the environment, and our roles in both. Today I'm excited to be joined by two incredible guests, Anastasia Bunce, a theatre and film director, and Grace Joy Howarth, playwright and musician. Anastasia is the artistic director of Patch Plays, a London-based theatre company devoted to staging work that explores animal ethics and climate change. She's fresh from an off-Broadway experience working on the musical Lifeline as an assistant director, and she's directed productions like Blood on Your Hands and Meet Cute, both critically acclaimed. Grace Joy Howarth, writer and producer of Blood on Your Hands, is a rising playwright whose work delves into the complex themes of exploitation, xenophobia, and masculinity through the lens of the slaughterhouse industry. In today's episode, we'll discuss how they use theatre to spark change, the challenges of balancing activism and artistry, and their vision for the future of theatre and activism. So, let's get started. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to come on this interview, because there's so much I want to pick both your brains about, because a theatre company, but also a playwright in veganism and animal rights is such a rare and new thing. I think it's so exciting, and to be talking to vanguards, I think, is a real honor. I'm a big fanboy. I suppose the first question, Annie, is with Patch Plays, there's a few things to ask there. What inspired it? And also, why the name? But also, why the focus on animal rights and veganism and climate change and all these important issues? So how did it come about, and why did you make those specific decisions?
Yeah, great question. Well, before it came about, when I was about 16, I was doing my A-level drama devised pieces, and that's when I went vegan as well. I go back to that before the origins of Patch Plays, because I think that's when I first sort of became interested in fusing my love of theatre with veganism. I went vegan at the time, and I was exploring directing and performing and all of that. So it goes back to then that interest sort of sparked. And then years down the line in 2020, I had graduated from my MA in directing, and I met a friend at this theatre called the Finborough. We both were just interning. She was vegan as well, and we were chatting, and it was COVID. It was the height of the pandemic. It was 2020. It was after we were interning there, and we were all in lockdown, and the restrictions just started easing up. So I remember distinctly, we met in a park, and, we were sort of talking about veganism and our love of theatre and wanting to put an event on, because we were already lonely and sat at home and not doing any theatre and not going anywhere, and the restrictions just eased. You're allowed to sort of do gatherings outside, and we thought, why not just start this really tiny scratch night, an event? We didn't even think of it as a theatre company at the time. We just thought short little plays that we could put on together and try and get vegan writers and vegan actors and vegan creatives together, because we knew a few amongst ourselves. So that's how Patch Plays started off, as just an idea of having these tiny little patch-like small pieces of theatre. We did our first live event, and it was the birth of the first scratch night, and it went really well. And we met lots of vegan artists through that. We had a lot of exciting new short plays, which then created some work for fuller length plays. And then down the line, it grew into a theatre company, and I met Grace through one of the call-outs as well. We've been working together now for 4 years. And we've expanded, and now she's working as associate artist with us and a long-term collaborator, and things kind of just snowballed from there.
Amazing. Yeah, I love how it's like a seed that grew in its own and then a bigger patch.
Exactly.
With that in mind, it's beautiful that it's come from just this drive to something on. Well, what was it that you were like, it needs to be vegan? Was it just because it stemmed from you, or was this idea that there's nothing else like it, or was it a mixture of the two? What was the thinking behind? Because a lot of theatre makers were like, I just want to make theatre, whatever it is, just good writing. Why was it we were like, well, we need to to zone in on that.
Yeah, I mean, exactly that. I'd always been really passionate about theatre. I knew at the time that I wanted to start directing. This was nearly 5 years ago. So I was looking selfishly for work to put on and, wanting to start my career and start directing. And when I started thinking about the material that I wanted to do, I really wanted to do something that I felt would have some political relevance and have some activist relevance to it. My biggest passion in life is veganism and animal rights. And how it connects to climate change. Also, there wasn't anything like that either. I thought, this is crazy that no one that I knew of in the UK was doing that. And meeting people who were vegan creatives as well, and seeing that there is a network of artists who share this passion and want to be able to fuse their love of theatre and the performing arts with their love of animals and the environment. I think theatre is a wonderful medium to do that with. And a lot of people do shows about lots of different topics, politically, activist-wise. I remember even during my A-levels, a lot of the themes at like A-level drama, people do the classic like gender issues, drug addiction, alcoholism, and you're meant to sort of tackle like subject-worthy matter, but no one was thinking about animal rights or veganism as part of that. I wanted to be able to fuse those two loves, and then saw that there are a lot of vegan artists who share that, which is wonderful. And then you can create a network and actually build on it and do it, and that there's an audience there for it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And just on even the last point with the audience, going down that thought of when I came to see the wonderful Blood in Your Hands, the community there of vegan activists, vegan artists, and the public as well was it was so exciting to see, because of my experience of theatre and studying theatre, there's a specific kind of demographic
Yeah.
for you to engage with, like an already mobile community, and add to the community and kind of inspire them as well. That's really, you're right. You really, there's a real hit the ground running with that kind of respect, I think, as well. So thinking about putting on plays, because theatre is such a unique art form, and there's pressure there, I'd imagine. Maybe you don't feel it, maybe you do feel it. I'd imagine you do feel it because you want people to see your plays and your work. So it's a question to both of you, really. Like Grace with writing plays, and Annie directing and producing. What is the balance there between, because animal rights and these complex issues that come along with that are super serious. Like, it's animal suffering. It's really like, it's huge to grapple. And we are not these non-human animals. We can't directly represent them. But you also want people to come and be engaged and also enjoy them, but not in a frivolous way. How do you balance that? And how do you feel, is that an extra challenge in your work, regardless of creating something substantial, but then thinking about the issue you're representing as well?
Oh yeah, 100%. I would like throughout the whole process, we had countless conversations about their full kind of women to argument across the spectrum, or market the show as explicitly like as vegan show, do we not? What's the battle of Rachel or the audiences? But then at the same time, we've even had some pushback from vegans who weren't so keen on hearing the views of the oppressors and voice represented. And yeah, it's such a morally great thing, because I totally understand that point of view as well. But I think with Blood on Your Hands and the work we want to do, I guess its main for is activism. And so reaching the non-vegan audience will we kind of we're playing with it. And of course, we also actually work what vegans feel represented in, and create something for our community where it doesn't exist. Right? There's people who aren't in the vegan community who maybe haven't come across these topics before. Like you say, sort of the theatre-going demographic. If we can reach those people with important stories and things that will, plant a seed, make them think about something that they don't usually think about. I think for me anyway, as a writer, that's sort of my key aim with it. So yeah, there was a lot of thought into how to connect with a human audience who probably like don't really care so much about like the vegan message, and So yeah, it's tricky. Obviously, as vegan, I'm like, yeah, I want to make it as activist as possible, but trying to find the balance in that and sort of stepping out of yourself and having a bit of a bird's eye view on the way people consume art and theatre and how to best approach them. And so we kind of thought that the human approach of focusing on humans who have been oppressed by the meat industry as well is probably, I mean, it's an angle that I hadn't seen represented anywhere, but also I thought that for the majority audience of people who, if we were to do a play about a cow, for example, quite a lot of audience members would probably be like, vegan, whatever, I'm not interested. Whereas we could say, actually, this is a human story. These humans, these people, it's all like a net of class issues and gender issues and all of these things that a lot of people are really empathetic about. And then we actually say, well, look, the meat industry is tied into this and you can't care about all of these issues without seeing that this is a big part of it. So it's kind of a way of making sure that the empathy then extends to vegan topics, and then hopefully from that it will trickle down and people will do some more research and things like that. But yeah, it's a really balance of do we just create art for vegans, which then maybe is just preaching to the choir a bit, or how do we then reach those non-vegan audiences without it being seen as a preachy thing, which, as vegans is a very annoying stereotype to have. So yeah, really tricky balance, but I think we're trying to forge that path a little bit, I guess.
It'd be good to hear, Annie, about because you do this great thing with batch plays where you do scratch nights and you get all these artists together. I'm always so impressed just on Instagram, seeing how many people you get involved in your scratch nights and how many scripts you get through and things like that. Is that part of the process in the sense of temperature checking things and going, okay, well, how will this work as a full production? Because obviously when you have a scratch night, you'll see all sorts of stuff. Have you got that producer's hat on? Imagine as full blown and which ones would work, which ones maybe are just effective as their own short.
100%, 100%. I mean, they function for two things. One largely is programming. So Blood on Your Hands first was a 15-minute piece in 2021. Yeah, 2021.
Yeah.
It was first a 50-minute piece, and it was genuinely just a 50-minute short play alongside 3 other ones. But the audience feedback was incredible. And when we were working on it, before working on it with actors, I didn't have anything in mind of being like, yeah, this will be the show that we work on for the next 3 years and become a fully fledged piece. But after audience feedback and after seeing the potential that it had, I really wanted to develop it with Grace and make it into a full-length piece that really deserves that ground and be able to, really make something out of it. So absolutely, the scratch nights do serve in that way. And our first show as a company, Meet Cute, that you spoke to BB about, my cousin and the writer of that, also was born at a scratch night, the very first one in 2020. And that was also a 10-minute piece at first. So they're really great to find plays, test them out, see what the audience feedback is like, and see if there's material that can be explored within them. And then the other one is genuinely to meet actors and other producers and writers and directors and to have a community where those artists are able to explore those topics, which not everyone is interested in seeing in programming. And it's a place where people can explore it and develop their craft and just try things out. And some stick and develop into full-length pieces and some are just small pieces in their own right, and therefore artists develop themselves.
Yeah, that's really good. That's great, that you provide not just the outcome of something much larger, but you're right, community building is such an important thing, especially for art and activism and things. That's really exciting. Grace, when you're talking about the process and grappling with that human story, animal story, packaging it in all these different, because you're right, everything's interconnected. And I think, I don't speak for you guys, but for me as a animal rights activist, when you're having conversations with people about other issues, and then this is kind of annoying vegan side, you go, well, there's also violence on our plates. If you think about violence against refugees or against women or other groups, and then you bring it back to, well, there's also systemic violence elsewhere in our everyday lives. It can be really difficult to flag that up without seeming kind of not watering down the other causes, but adding something else to the list. When you were going through that process of writing, were these questions, so I suppose this is a very long way of saying, was your first draft very similar to the end, as in what your focus was? So, for example, did you start with more on animals and then end with more on humans, or vice versa, or was there a journey there as well?
Yeah, so I mean, the very first Scratch Night that was the 15-minute piece was almost identical to the very beginning of the play and the very ending. So it was kind of those two scenes. I don't know if it's a spoiler, but it's the very opening scene where Dan and Kotja, the two characters, kind of meet in the break room, and then the very end scene where they're clearing out the locker and everything. So that kind of translated almost identically across. And the writing process then was about filling in the middle of the story. And I think the main vegan thing that came out of that was the kill dance, which is the sort of slaughterhouse scene in the middle, which has always been one of my favorites. Seems like the wrong word because it's so gory, but I just felt like it was such an impactful way to, yeah, like I've never ever seen slaughterhouse work represented, and it's so in your face and so horrific. And I guess with that, you only have a little chance to do it. Like if you had the whole show like that throughout the whole time, it would just be too much. People wouldn't connect with it, but they had like that little snippet in the middle. So I think that was the main sort of, that came in the writing process, that I really wanted to, for audiences to see the horror of that. So yeah, that kind of came anew because that wasn't in the 15-minute version. And then I suppose that it also got more developed. We had the female characters came in, and throughout the writing process, they've had sort of differing roles. So it was really important to me for this most recent version of the Southwark to try and represent sort of the vegan activist voice more through the character of Eden. And yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and I still feel like, you know, if we were ever to do it in the future or to do a different project, you know, there's still so much that can be said about the representation of vegan activism on stage and how complex and how, like, the community is so multifaceted. To do that in such a role that's so small I just wanted to throw everything at it, but, you know, didn't have the space. I think that was something that I felt really compelled to bring into the most recent version, is the role of vegan activism and how it interplays. We always want to bring that veganism to the forefront sometimes when there's so much in the world that's terrible and there's so much suffering. As vegans, we always just bring it back to that everyday violence. So easy to stop. So I wanted to represent that as well, and definitely something that I want to explore more in my future work of vegan activism, but also making it empathetic to a non-vegan audience and trying to represent all of the millions things, because I feel like most people who aren't vegan probably don't know half of the little things that we all debate over and try to figure out amongst ourselves, and the aim of trying to do good overall. So that's something that's really important to me.
Another thing I think, Grace, that you really drew out in the longer version was the war in Ukraine, with the development of the character of Kost's wife, Nina, being back home, because she didn't exist in the short version either. So even the context, doing it first in 2021 and then the invasion in 2022 and doing it again in 2024, that changed a lot for your script, didn't it?
Oh yeah, 100%. That shifted everything. And I remember we did a slightly shorter version. I think it was about an hour long, or an hour and 10 minutes. At the Cockpit Theatre in 2022, months after the Russian invasion. And that had a lot of conversations of, do we stick with it being a Ukrainian character? At that stage, or a script, it could have been switched to another Eastern European country, because in the very first 15 minutes, it was more, yeah, there's someone who's come from afar and is being mistreated because they are a migrant worker and there's xenophobia and everything, but it wasn't explicitly tied to war in any way. And then developing it, we thought that we actually were in this time now, and to embrace it would be to tell the story in the most truthful way and try and reckon with the fact that there would be people going through war, and also maybe struggling with being sort of plummeted into the meat industry. So yeah, that was definitely something that developed as time went on and the real world changed around it. Really eye-opening to see.
Yeah, that's great. I think there's loads there. Just going back to your description of the slaughterhouse, what did you call it? Like, it's not a dance, it's a physical.
Wow.
It's
It's
but you're
called
right.
the carol dance in the script, but yeah, it's not so much a dance in the physical.
It was so powerful, you're right. And I remember that distinctly, like this incredibly visceral and kind of mechanical kind of this mess and kind of choreographed kind of, it was really well done. So well done, you guys, in the sense of the animal wasn't there, but we felt the animal there. I think that's such a tricky thing to do, especially like not just in theatre, but also like in activism itself, like street activism, or like to bring the animal into the space without bringing them into the space. It's such a unique skill to kind of bring. And I think I would argue that theatre is a perfect vehicle for that, because it's all about coming together to agree on believing in a story and going with that story without it being real. The emotions are real. So that was such an impactful moment for sure. And as an audience member, I suppose it's difficult as a vegan in a way to be so biased, I suppose. But I'll try and be as objective as possible in regards to the vegan activists, the animal rights activists in your play, because you're right, they were so complex. And you did so well to kind of not be over sympathetic with them, because I think I would be tempted, wrongly tempted, to be like, you misunderstand animal rights activists. Like this is what they're really like. They're kind and they're beautiful and they're peaceful. But you're right, there's a real tension there in the sense of actually activists struggle every day to be heard and struggle with their own like how best to be heard, and they can be misinterpreted, or they maybe ignore something because they're so passionate about something else. Place where I totally empathize with them, but I also saw frustrations that they are perceived as someone else by a non-vegan group or non-activist group. I think there was a real value in that, and it was a really powerful decision to include them. And yeah, on the Ukraine thing, like, again, it just adds to this kind of amalgamation of systemic abuse of humans and animals in this kind of network. Yeah, it's, and base at a slaughterhouse is like this correlation of abuse in this kind of concentrated area was really powerful. And it's fascinating to hear how you layered it, both of you layered it to create this kind of really powerful piece. So it's really exciting. I suppose going from that then, audiences, I'm always wary to ask this because I'm not expecting you to go, well, they went vegan, or they went away and they created their own work, whatever. But I suppose it'll be really interesting to hear your insight into what you hoped the audiences would take away, all the different kind of audiences, and what maybe some feedback you got from these audiences. Just speaking from personal experience of talking to the vegans who were there, they was incredibly motivated and wanting to see more, and I feel that's really bled into the community just from secondhand watching a London community be very excited by it. So yeah, what insights have you both gained from Blood in Your Hands, but also any wider field, like with Meet Cute, which I know is quite a different beast in itself, and then from your Scratch Nights and your films as well?
Yeah, well, from Blood in Your Hands, I mean, and Meet Cute, over the years, you do hear a couple of people say the goal long term, right? Of course, we want people to see the shows and to come away and to think about their own dietary habits and the wider repercussions. Of course, that is essentially a huge goal. And when it happens, it's wonderful. And in my own circle of friends, I know that my aunt and my best friend basically went vegan over the past couple of years after seeing Meet Cute and Blood in Your Hands. And the timing is interesting because they never said like, oh, because of that play, but also the timing is maybe coincidental. And I think it makes sense that someone might not see something and immediately go vegan after one show, but maybe over time coming to different shows and it being on the mind and having that layering it takes time sometimes, I think, for people to really come around and have their whole perception changed on it. So I'd like to think that that is happening with some audiences. And even if it's not an overnight thing, just to be like engaging people's empathy with this subject matter that they might not ever come across or have to come across in their daily lives. So that is a huge goal. And one of our actors who was in the version at the cockpit, we saw him like a week ago or so and had a drink with him. And he said that his mum, to this day, still says how much it's changed her view of her own eating habits in the meat industry. I don't know if she's gone vegan or not, but the fact that it's changed how she thinks about it, at least, is like a stepping stone. So that's really wonderful. And it's nice to hear about the vegan community as well, because we've also met a lot of vegan activists who have been now thinking about this relation between performance and vegan activism as a medium.
Grace, what was your, I suppose, I know Annie is a director, you'd feel very precious about blood in your hands, but I'd imagine Grace is even a deep from the sense of walking out of the theatre after seeing your production. And so basically sitting in the theatre, watching your play out, and then walking out with the audience. I mean, what were your emotions? What were your feelings? What were your observations when you were walking out with that kind of experience of watching the play with a group of friends and strangers, and then from there onwards?
Yeah, firstly, it was always just like one of the real life highs for sure, just to be able to see my work on stage and be worked on by so many talented people, and to sit there night after night and be like, gosh, how lucky am I that I get to tell a story that's really important to me and share it with people who might never has come across it at all. So I just felt really, really deeply grateful, and I just could never shake that the whole way through the 3 weeks. But I remember we did sometimes hear little murmurings of people we didn't know in the audience, which is always terrifying at first. And then we were like, oh no, that was actually really sweet. You know, when the lights go up and people are like, what? So you just like, please don't say anything terrible. But we didn't ever hear anything terrible. So that's it was such almost an out of body experience, really, to hear people's thoughts. And obviously we came across a lot of people that said, oh, like, I've never ever thought like this in my whole life. Like, this is really, just really hit them in a way because they'd never come across it. And then on the other hand, lots of vegans who felt, very, very touched that there was, something that talked about veganism and, hopefully inspired, if they were creative to kind of, like, I know we connected with some people after the play who are vegan writers and creators, which has been really lovely to sort of bring them into the Patch Plays community as well. But yeah, I suppose the main thing is hearing people who, like, family members who aren't vegan, sort of extended family members who have to then, I suppose, sit with the feeling and make people confront their actions and their life diary in a way that's very accessible and not too, like, pointing the finger and sort of telling you off sort of way. So I think that was really, really incredible, and definitely something in the future that I want to keep being able to do with my work is trying to connect with people and make them think, and hopefully further down the line make those steps toward going vegan, or to becoming more of an activist or whatever it may be. But that's always my main goal.
I think it's important as well to say that, it's wonderful. We hear lovely feedback and, the few people who do go vegan, obviously you also get people who are just totally shocked and kind of like don't really know how to feel immediately, right? Because we want to leave people with, it's a drama, it's a heavy drama, there's a lot of heavy subject matter. So you want to leave people with the time to process everything that they've seen.
Sure.
I think a big impression I got from different audiences and even my friends was people not really knowing what to say or feel about what they've seen. And I think that's a big part of doing activist theatre or any activism, right? That you might not know what reactions you'll get, and that's part of it, and not just creating something that is going to entertain people or leave people saying wonderful things about your work. And that's nice, and we want that. But that also some people might just be really totally shocked, not know what to say, maybe some people hated it. I don't know. We were lucky not to hear any of that. But you know, in the past with other shows, I've definitely you're doing work where some people will love it, some people will hate it, some people won't know how to feel about it. And I think that's the main thing for us when doing these types of shows, that you're just putting it out there, and then it's up to people to interpret it how they will.
Yeah.
Like, get some backlash sometimes too.
Yeah, I think definitely. I'd rather have a play that caused some conversation rather than something that everyone was like, great job. And then you think, just because that feels a bit more shallow, really. Obviously, it would be nice, but you know, it's more important to touch people on a deeper level, I think.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think from my own point of view to theatre and through my research, just going on what you guys are saying about how it's a conversation and it's bringing people together. And I always come back to like theatre is the perfect vehicle for that, because you go to the theatre knowing that you're not being judged. So you're going back to Grace, your point about like, there's no vegan there going, you're bad. Like,
Yeah.
it's more like, let's experience a story about these key themes that are happening to us and to animals. And this is a safe space where we explore these emotions and these stories. And there's no judgment here because we're a collective and we're sharing ideas. So it's really interesting to hear from you both about how it is, what you get from it is very like productive, but also it's not finger pointing, and it's not also expectational either. You're not at the end going like, okay, now you need to sign up to Veganuary. I mean, I'm sure,
Yeah.
but it's more of a case, and like it's a seed rather than a lecture. It's like, and how stories are so powerful to tell that. Like, I'm always a big proponent of like, we learn by stories, and theatre is the purest of theatre storytelling. So it's really good to hear that. Just from the audience question, which is fascinating. Annie, what's the long-term goals here? What is there any bigger picture stuff, or is there any ideas that feel that you're working towards?
Absolutely. We have too many goals. Like one long-term one that I would love is to have a theatre building in London where we can produce more than one show a year. You know, I keep meeting so many vegan writers and directors and actors, and it would be wonderful to have a theatre where we can actually program other people's work as well to do with this subject matter on a bigger scale than the scratch nights, because we already have that monthly thing where we're getting lots of new work. So to have a building where that could actually be happening on a bigger scale would be wonderful, and to have a community centre there, and you know, partner with like a vegan restaurant, and just have a space that's a permanent building, which, you know, would be absolutely wonderful. So that's one long-term goal. And then we've also got a couple of films. So with Meet Cute and Blood on Your Hands, we've made them into short films in the hopes that we'd love both to become series or films, because I think there's so much more longevity to both of those stories with the brilliant writers that Grace and Bibi are. So we'd love to try and develop those even further as well. So yeah, those are our two main ones.
Yeah, it's fascinating with the it's really interesting with the film section of your strategy, because as activists, well, as I suppose as theatre makers as well, you want your work to be substantial and kind of reach as many people as possible. And I really love how there's this kind of beating heart of theatre that you create through your scratch nights and through your full productions. And then you get like, okay, we've done it and we've seen it live and seen the responses. And we want everyone to see it. So let's create something else from that. And I think there's a really healthy kind of trajectory, especially for activism, where we want the message out in the most creative ways possible. And theatre is such a exciting but temporary thing, isn't it?
The beauty of theatre that it's live, and I think there's still that there are benefits to theatre and film that are different, right? In theatre, like, you're all in one space for a certain amount of time, You can't really leave. You can, but you'd be frowned upon. So you're in the stage. You've got to watch it. You've got to be there, and you feel it directly, and it's visceral, like you say. And with film, you could switch it off. You don't necessarily have to stay for the whole thing. So there's that benefit to theatre. With film, of course, you reach wider audiences, and I think you can get a momentum with film that's just longer term, right? With theatre, it's happened for a month and then it's done. And with film, once it's out there, or a TV series, if it blows up, it's a huge deal, and then lots of people could see it, and it can become more of a popular medium to watch through. So I just want to expand things with films, that we have those two strategies, and that we can work through two different mediums. And different scripts lend themselves to different mediums. Blood on Your Hands, we just felt after the play, we had some reviews and some people who were sort of giving us feedback on saying that the script itself and the dialogue would lend itself nicely to the medium of film or TV. So it also depends on the project and the material. Some would work well for it, some wouldn't. So the film thing's new for us, but it's definitely an avenue that we want to explore for all those reasons.
It'll be interesting to pick your brains about, and there might not be an answer here. I don't. It's not really a question yet, I suppose. And feel free to say, well, I don't know, or whatever. But I'm really interested in, because what you do is activism, because of the messages that you are creating and communicating. Where do you see your work, Grace? Where do you see your writing? Where do you see your plays? Annie, where do you see your work and your craft and the theatre company, as in the spectrum of the animal rights movement? Big question.
Yeah, really big question. I mean, I am always a big proponent of, I think the more forms that activism can take, the better. So yeah, definitely not out here saying like, kid is the only way, but everything else, which would be completely ridiculous. But I think, yeah, that there's so many audiences, quote unquote, or people that can, some people will really be engaged to, like the documentary footage, that will really impact a certain group of people. But then a different group of people, for example, me, I really like the gore and stuff, and those images are really upsetting to me. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that would be really which, obviously it's meant to be upsetting, but some people can't sit through things like that, and maybe they'll be more connected to like seeing the positive angle of veganism and how good it can be for health or for the environment. There's so many different angles, and I think the wider that we as vegan activists can, God, I need to think of a more vegan way of saying spread the net, but to widen the appeal, I guess, of activism and reaching different people in the world. Because there's no form of activism across any sort of social justice movement that is going to connect 100% with every single person, because everyone comes towards activism in a different light. They might be completely shut off to it. They might be, willing to talk about it. They might be like 99% of the way there. So I think, that theatre for us is something that I, as a writer, and Annie wanted to do as a director anyway, was something we were really drawn to, and that through connecting what mattered the most to us, and then being able to bring that to an audience, I think, it's the driving force behind why I write a lot of the time. And it's something that I want to keep doing throughout my whole career is that. So, I hope in the future we do see a lot more vegan creative companies, or obviously patch plays growing and becoming more of a, to have a lot more people working with us would be lovely, because we end up doing sort of 1,000,001 jobs because it's so difficult to for all the many reasons of producing theatre and everything. But hopefully down the line in 10 years we'll have a big team, and people will be able to connect with the work through different mediums, and maybe around the world there'll be more vegan theatre or vegan art. I know obviously it all exists out there already, but just hopefully as the tide rises, the projects increase as well. So it would just be lovely to see more vegan art and things that connect with people's empathy and work as both good forms of activism, but also good art and good theatre is what I'd love to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to Grace, making things more mainstream as well, right? Because we're like an indie small theatre company, but essentially with activism, the goal is to make it a bigger deal and to get to a point where when I was in America, I saw this musical called Sucks on Broadway, and it was essentially an activist musical. I mean, it was on Broadway, it was a commercial show, and I don't think many people would call it that, but I think it was, because it was about the suffragist movement in America. And about women's rights. And it's put on a time where Donald Trump might come back into power, and with all the debates on abortion, etc., women's rights, you've got this musical on, and it's a commercial enterprise. It's a huge deal. It's not a tiny theatre company in London doing something. So I'd love to get to the stage at some point in our career where it's a big deal and where it could be, Grace also wrote a musical, and see if we could do something on a bigger scale. Because with activism, I think you need to get to that. It's great doing small independent things, but to really make like a huge splash, the bigger we can make something and have bigger audiences, the bigger splash you can make as well. Which can happen with partnering and with connecting with different forms of activism as well. So, when we did a lot of like Veg Fest, we were meeting lots of different people, even for Blood on Your Hands, all the vegan activists who submitted videos for the montage when Eden was watching footage, that's like baby steps in connecting more with the vegan activist field and meeting other activists to make it a bigger thing together as well. So yeah, becoming more mainstream, I think, would help.
Yeah, for sure. I think as a theatre fan and film fan, I think these industries are prime for that, aren't they? They're telling the stories, and these stories are scalable, whether that's on the West End on a stage or in independent cinemas, or like there's real opportunity for like growth from that seed. Yeah, that's really exciting. Just going on the activism. I mean, this is a slightly. I don't mean it to sound negative at all, and these are things that I grapple with all the time. As someone who champions theatre and performing arts and activism, through my own experience, anecdotal experience, mind you. So feel free to push back and go, actually, I don't experience this at all. One of my main concerns is, especially at the beginning of my research, was performance is kind of like, it's not proper activism because it's like it's in theatre, it's a safe place, it's got a specific stereotype like we were before, or demographic. It's not breaking into someone and stealing it and saving an animal, or it's not directly talking to someone about the actual issues. It's kind of dancing around. And my big thing is I want people to see that it's just as valid, if not maybe ignored. It's ignored of how powerful it could be because of the stories. Stories are so powerful, and that's how we interact with each other. So whether this question is not, have you had people say this isn't worth it or it's a waste of resources? I mean, you might get that, but more than philosophical grapple, like when you think about activism, and maybe there were conversations you were having with some activists about how where Patch Plays lies, or where theatre lies, or where Blood on Your Hands lies within the movement or within activism. Has there been that grappling, or do you feel that do you feel that tension?
I think we've been lucky in that we haven't come across that. Everyone's been really supportive. We've come across in the vegan movement, and with people who are doing that, across and are really on the front line of it. And it's amazing that people have been really supportive and see the value in it. So we've been lucky with that. And I think with theatre in itself as well, from my point of view as a creative, and I think I don't want to speak for you, Grace, but as a writer, is what I value in your writing as well. I value that you kind of, even though we're an activist theatre company and call ourselves that, and we're doing plays for activist purposes, we also need to be delicate with the way in which we do it, and what the writing is like, in that it isn't having a villain and having a hero and doing it in a really straightforward way. So even though it's activism, it's got to be still a piece of art. So I don't think it's not pure activism. It's activism and art together. And for art to be truly artistic in my view, it has to be subjective still on some level, and you can't paint things as black and white, and because it's not going to leave people long term with any emotional things to feel about the piece. And Tennessee Williams is one of my favorite playwrights, and he infamously said before to like Elia Kazan, who's going to direct Streetcar, that it's not that Blanche is like the innocent heroine and then Stanley's a villain, and you can't do things in that light. So I think with the whole medium of calling ourselves activist theatre company, it's with the understanding that to actually have any lasting effect, in my mind, we have to be subtle about it, and we're not breaking into factories and saving animals, and that's amazing, and I support that as well. And I think there are braver people doing that, but that as an art form, we can't be as black and white about certain issues and have to have delicacy around it. So that's how I view it. And as Grace said, that there are so many different forms, peaceful and violent and artistic and more on the front line, and that we need all of those. And this is where our strengths lie. So we're using what we have to try and contribute to it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because I suppose, I know exactly what you mean, and I feel like as vegans, maybe we do just grapple with things in our mind constantly of trying to figure out the best way to be the best activist we can be and to be the most impactful we can be. So yeah, it's definitely something that throughout the writing process, throughout the production process, I was always conscious of how is this going to impact people in the most powerful way. And yeah, I think I totally get what you mean. It's because I when I was doing my BA, I also did my final dissertation, not about veganism or animal rights, unfortunately, but just about activism inside musical theatre, and did a lot of research on sort of that. I've forgotten the name, but the impact of once you go and watch something and the curtain will come down, there's a sense of like, okay, I've watched that story, that's closed, it's finished, and you can step away as an individual and be like, okay, but that's got nothing to do with me, and that sort of, not bystander effect, but just the effect of being separate from the thing you've just seen versus your own personal action. And yeah, it's something that, we can't break through to every single person and be like, and now I'm going vegan, and then, it magically be that everyone walks out vegan, even though that would be incredible. So yeah, I mean, it's something that I'm, always thinking about, always trying to weigh up the best way to connect with people on that level. And I guess I've just always known that I wanted to be a writer, and for us as creative, sort of aside from the vegan side of it, if I would probably still be writing plays and writing everything, if veganism didn't exist and it was just not part of who I was. So I think using what I wanted to do and the stories I wanted to tell to then focus on something that is activist in your message, even if it's not the front line stuff, I think is the way that, it's the best form of activism for me. I mean, I've done some of the front line stuff and I'm not that great at it. I've got a very soft voice, so trying to convince people to be like, oh, by the way, there's like the goose that kills a ton of the goose junk is always a little bit, it's not where my strengths lie. So I think, we all have our own skill sets, and we should all use those in the best way towards our activism. And maybe theatre isn't sort of the most obviously like activist form, but it doesn't necessarily grab an animal and save it in that moment. But I think there's still a benefit, whether it's through theatre or art or film or any sort of creative medium, songwriting. I think, it's more about planting the seed into people's minds, and hopefully then that rippling out to the bigger effect of reducing meat consumption and stepping towards the vegan world, even if it's a more slow and steady approach, rather than it being so sort of clearly we have saved this animal, which of course totally stand behind and think of it an amazing form as well. So it's just different approaches really, and I think they're all needed.
And because also
Yeah.
people become vegan for very different, not only reasons, but in different ways. Like I know my dad, for example, he was vegetarian for years. And I was raised vegetarian. Both my parents were vegetarian, and then my mum went vegan and I did, but he still didn't until recently. And he was someone who couldn't just watch Earthlings. I watched Earthlings and that did it for me overnight. I was like, I needed to see something in front of me and be shocked into it and see the facts. He would not be able to do it. As many times as I tried to get him to watch it, he refused. And I don't know what made him vegan, but he just said he came to it gently, sort of over a couple of years. And I think people are just so different in what opens their eyes to it. So we need all these different forms, because some person needs to be leafleted in the street and another person needs to go watch a show, and we all have different mediums we're doing to get the different people in, right? So yeah.
Yeah, that's really inspirational. I think it's a really inspirational message you both communicate with utilizing your own skills, but you're right, different people respond differently. I always like to think of theatre and creative arts in animal rights as like contributing to the cultural narrative, because as a society we just tell ourselves like we are a society that does this behavior and this behavior, but then if we're contributing to art a different story or a different perspective of the story, then it can only be a good thing, because people are going away from blood in your hands and going, well, I saw this, I didn't really think about that. And then that's a conversation that's been happening with someone who may not have even probably didn't see a play, like that's telling his grandma he saw a really interesting play about slaughterhouses and he didn't really think about that. And she said, oh, I didn't think about that either. And there's a real power there in just the domino effect of stories being told. I think it's really, really, really exciting medium.
See it just on that. So I think we see it with different issues, right, throughout history as well. Like if you look at like feminism or race or gender and sexuality, like you have different playwrights at different periods of history, sort of, you know, bringing light to certain issues subtly, just through representation or tackling that. And then over time, we're all trying to evolve to the next stage of equality with a certain group, right? So our group, I guess, are animals that we're trying to do that with. And hopefully it's like a canon that keeps growing, right? And that keeps expanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Touch wood. And it's a really exciting time. And I really wish you luck, and I hope the best for you, really, both as individual artists and as patch plays. I think it's a really exciting time. I think if we have time, it would be really nice to just ask one more question about, well, what would you say to a creative who's already creating, maybe, or maybe someone who wants to create, whether that's directing, acting, writing, or anything in between, or producing, who's interested in getting involved in more activist-based art? What would your advice be to them?
To just do it. It's an easy answer, but to do it, because then you'll find people to do it with you, right? Like as soon as you start, I'm a firm believer, as soon as you start putting your work out there, especially in the UK, we're really lucky. There's lots of different pub theatres and writing nights and groups. You meet people who want to work with you, and I'm so lucky that Grace and I, you know, found each other and we work so well together, and it helps us motivate each other to put work on, because it's difficult sometimes to just do one thing yourself, especially with theatre. If you're writing, acting, directing, you need other creators to do things with. So to find like scratch nights, to submit writing, or directors to apply to scratch nights, and then you meet other actors and creatives, and it snowballs from there. So I really think it's just putting yourself out there, finding where the opportunities are, and meeting other people who you can work with.
Yeah. And to jump off that as well, I think the one thing that I've definitely learned through the process, like a few years ago, I would have been like, oh no, I'm not a producer. I never wanted to look at anything production-wise. I'm a creator, I'm a writer. I do not produce. And it was just something that I just felt, oh no, I can't be dealing with a writing, sending application. That's not my skill set at all. But actually, I think as writers, as creators, obviously it's difficult on the one hand if it takes up a lot of time and there is like a learning curve, but I think it's all stuff that is accessible with a bit of work for the most part. So, it's really hard as an individual to be like, okay, how do I how do I make this work? How do I even begin? But yeah, so like Ernie said, finding the community is really important. But also, I think if you're someone who's like, no, I'm creative, don't produce, it seems to be like the only way that you can ever really get that's foot in the door at the moment is unfortunately self-producing and sort of taking on a lot of the more admin-y things yourself. So I think kind of if you are stepping into that industry, just trying to equip yourselves with like art council forms and just figuring out how to do a budget and figuring out contracts and all of the boring stuff that seems so the opposite of art. But actually, yeah, if we were waiting around waiting for producers to help us do all of that, wouldn't have had anything come out of it because it's hard to get the producers interested when there isn't like that big funding behind it. So yeah, trying to wear those hats yourself, even if it's seems like the opposite of your true dreams. It helps you build the road towards that. Even though obviously you can be gritting your teeth through some of the less creative aspects of it, I think that helped us both because our first project we weren't producers on and we were like, actually no, we need to we can build this in the way that we need to build it, and that is something that I think
Yeah, neither of us ever wanted to produce. Now we quite like, and we see we can put on, and then it's like, we do the boring stuff in order to then do the things we want to, which is writing and directing. So yeah, 100% Grace with you on that.
Perfect. It kind of just narrow, like there's less gatekeepers in that effect. You can kind of try and build your way there yourself rather than having to wait for people, which in the industry is, it's not necessarily that easy to do because everyone's so busy and working on a million things. It just makes it a little bit more accessible, even though there's still so many hurdles to jump over. It just helps you climb over them a little bit better, I think.
Yeah, and there are so many places in London. I only know about London because I'm London based, and I hope that this is the case outside of London as well. But in London, there are so many pub theatres that do have new writing programs and scratch that you can just submit your work to as like a first thing and then see what comes from there. So there are a lot of opportunities where if you don't know how to produce, you can at least put something on and then see how it further develops out of that. So yeah, we're lucky to have that in London, and I hope there are places beyond that as well that do support that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think just to pick two things there with the self-producing, you're right, it can be trying, but I suppose again, going back to the actor's point of view, it feels like you're not just doing it for yourself, but you're doing it for something greater, which is a bigger motivator, I would imagine.
Yeah, so absolutely. Yeah, yes. Like we both work voluntarily on our shows, and yeah, the main reason why we do that is because for us it's our activism, it's our doing good to the world. And if we were just producing, something else that didn't have any activist message behind it, there would be a lot less push behind why we would want to do that. So yeah, it's our main thing really is the activist message and trying to do good, for sure.
And I suppose the most heartening thing is, Annie, he said just at the beginning of that answer about how there is a community there already, and it's a growing community, and it's lots of passionate people who are really, really invested in it. Even maybe they wouldn't even count themselves as, like, I met a lot of audience members, I'd on your hands, of vegan activists who wants to help and push patch plays and like more like creative art stuff around veganism, but wouldn't class themselves as creative, but they want to help in other ways. And So that's really exciting as well, that there's a real force behind this, which is exciting.
There's so much support, and that's why when you say, yeah, what are your future plans, they seem like they could happen, and they're like not just, you know, clouds in the sky, because there's a supportive group, and there is a community that we've really seen, especially with the turnout for Blood on Your Hands. So it's wonderful. How many can say that? It's you know, that's sometimes what I think about, that there really is this community that wants to support each other. So there is longevity to it. So we're so grateful that there is a community, and there is a need for it, and that we want to grow together.
Lovely. So exciting. Well, thank you so much. That was fascinating. And thank you for listening. That's a wrap for this episode of the Performing Animal Rights podcast. Again, a huge thank you to Anastasia Bunce and Grace Joy Howarth for sharing their powerful work and perspectives on how theatre can be a tool for change. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to follow the podcast and share it with fellow creatives and activists. You can find more episodes, resources, and information about our guests at performinganimalrights.org. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, goodbye.